matters to a degree who's in office. It's questionable how big those degrees really are, because Bitcoin also was really great under Biden. Like it went up massively, the community got stronger, and everything was there. Like there was choke point 2.0. Like there was a lot of bad things that Biden did. But then it's like, yeah, like to what extent will we anyways go to those do that Bitcoin way? And I guess the politicians can then just influence how smoothly we go to this Bitcoin world. Are we going on a rough patch where we are almost like enemies of the state, or are we going together with the state where it's smoother for those who hold Bitcoin and are advocating for Bitcoin? I think those are the only two ways, and this is a big difference. Like I kind of talked it low now, but I think that's a very important thing to fight for, to have a smooth transition to Bitcoin and not a rough one. When you look at it in general, how do you look on the 4 years that Biden had, and now the 4 years on Trump, and maybe even I don't know if you've have thoughts on that. Those first like almost 1 year of Trump versus the last 4 years, like now like 5 years ago, that Trump had in his first term. How do you look at that with the Bitcoin development also and the Bitcoin regulations?
Yeah. So I would say, Biden was clearly, pretty hostile to cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin in general. There was Operation Choke Point 2.0 going on behind the scenes. Full reserve banks, the least risky possible way of banking in Custodia was getting stonewalled because they were friendly to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. So there was definitely a concerted effort to suppress things. I mean, the irony is that because they pressed things so hard and because Gensler was so antagonistic, they wound up getting the ETFs approved. So like that's like the silver lining and maybe even turning point of the Biden administration. Like this, in spite of all that, they couldn't, thankfully, like the common law system of the United States prevailed. And they're like, yeah, you can't just arbitrarily stop a spot ETF. Like they're going to happen. And so that kind of forced the hands of, formerly much more hostile entities. And I'd argue they're still hostile, but at least they're publicly less hostile in people like BlackRock having to kind of get on the Bitcoin train. And so maybe their calculation was like, we can't fully stop Bitcoin, but how can we manipulate it to our favor? So, that happened. That was the silver lining. Trump's been better, but, there's still, in the same way that there was the silver lining in Biden's era, the Trump era, there's still, they continued prosecuting the Samurai case, even though the Blanche memo, the deputy attorney general said, we're not going to do legislation by prosecution, but they allowed that case to go through and they let the rogue Southern District of New York just do whatever they wanted. And that was, luckily, because it pled out, it does not necessarily set precedent, but I think the Storm case is really bad for precedent. And I think that needs to get completely rewritten, because what people need to remember is this isn't about money. This isn't about, transmitting things. This is about the First Amendment. This is pretty fundamental. This is about the First Amendment. And that was the argument that the original cypherpunks made in Bernstein versus US, and they won. The United States government in the 90s tried to prevent encryption from proliferating by classifying it as an armament. So saying that it's a weapon of war and you can't export it. So they proved them wrong. They printed it on a t-shirt and proved that it's just math, bro. It's just math. And if it's just math, code of speech. And I agree with that. I think that's the only approach that we need. And I think I am very disappointed that the Trump administration fell for that and allowed that to continue, and now is calling into question whether or not we even have a First Amendment beyond the Fourth Amendment arguments for privacy. Like it calls into question the First Amendment. And if you look at what the Biden administration was doing and what they were gearing up for had Kamala won, I think they would have done a much harsher crackdown on free speech, like what we're seeing in the UK. You look at the arrest of Pavel Durov, the Telegram creator. He that's an affront the First Amendment. Like that's what they're trying to do, is crack down on free speech. Make no mistake, that arrest in France does not happen without the United States State Department having approval. So I think that's a bad look. I think all that's a bad look. I think there needs to be like an extreme push for the First Amendment, for freedom of speech, and I think the way that it's just kind of fallen by the wayside in favor of some other agendas is alarming. And I think there has to be like extreme legislative action, technological action, like across the board to codify the First Amendment. And because if you think about it, all Samurai did was take messages and retransmit other messages. They didn't touch money. They're not a money transmitter, but they were still classified that way anyway. And that needs to change. There needs to be better legislation. I think the uh, Regulatory Clarity Act helps a lot with that. I think, if you're an open source developer, you got to be real careful when you're touching funds, when you're accepting funds, when you're running things as a business. But I think the silver lining is that if something like the Clarity Act gets passed, and then you wind up with the ability to create open source software and just release it into the wild, and if people run it, they run it. If they don't run it, they don't run it. But that's their First Amendment right to free speech. So I think that's the direction things need to take. And once again, like, I don't think we should just cede the political ground just because our focus is on the technological. I certainly don't think we can ignore the technological. That really is like the most important thing. But I do think picking up and calling your senator takes like 5 minutes. Like, call them and give them a piece of your mind and tell them that you're going to donate to their opposition if they do anything that's hostile to Bitcoin.
I think being political active is, especially in the Bitcoin community, something that's hard, because people make that argument that if you are politically active, you're contributing to the system, and this makes the system stronger, and Bitcoin is there to make the system weaker. I disagree with that a lot, but I hear that argument here and there, because I personally think that the system is here, it's reality, it is what it is, and there will probably in my lifespan always be a system where we decide how we live together, and the system will be there if you like it or not. And so we probably have to we have to push this system in a way, in the direction that favors Bitcoin. At least do a little bit, even if it's just like 1 degree, even if it's just 2 degrees, it's better off.
When it's all out war, you don't just say, I'm only going to fight this way. You adapt. That's how guerrilla warfare wins. And I agree that, there's a possibility of making the system much stronger. Definitely if you give the system your loyalty or too much of your psychic energy, it's a problem. But, there is value in saying, hey, this is the nuclear option. If you guys touch Bitcoin, then we're going to just vote you out. And I do think there's value in having, liberty-minded people run for office. I have a friend here who's, Iraq veteran, stand-up guy, went to Harvard, great guy. Like, I'm looking forward to seeing if, and I know he's considering it. I won't say his name, but um, I think somebody like that would be great, because he's a stand-up guy. He believes in Bitcoin. He believes in what we're doing, and he loves his country. And that's the type of person you want in office to, at a minimum, slow this down. Because really, at this point, I don't think it's about making them do a strategic reserve. I could care less whether or not they do that. I actually think it'd be kind of funny if they didn't. Truthfully, it'd be kind of just desserts for me. But I do want to slow them down as much as possible and just buy as much time for Bitcoin as possible, because we're still not there yet. I think we really need more adoption before it's at the point where they can't touch it in a meaningful way economically.
I think we still have to fight for Bitcoin. We have a magical line, and the magical line is somewhere between like 4% to 10% of people that are intolerant about Bitcoin, and they will push Bitcoin to the masses. Maybe I should back up just a little bit to make you understand what I mean. Is if we get, I always make that example. because it's very simple. If you have in a restaurant, if you have 4% or 5% or 6%, let's make it easy and conservative. Let's make 10%. If you have 10% of the world's population that says, um, I will only eat meat, and this is the only diet that I'm willing to eat. This forces naturally every single restaurant in the world to at least have one meat option. The same argument you can make the other way around with vegetarian food or with any food, by that matter. Even if it let's take it to an extreme. Let's say peanut butter. Like 10% of the world says I only eat peanut butter. That's the only thing I want to eat for the rest of my life. Completely unhealthy. You should not do that. But let's make that example. If 10% of the world says I want to eat a peanut butter dish, if you then have those 10% and a restaurant has, let's say, 1,000 people per month, if 100 people, 10%, come in every single month and say, oh, do you serve some peanut butter here? And the restaurant says, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have that on the menu. And they walk out of the store and don't eat there and leave their money basically behind. 10% is such a huge number for that restaurant that they will say, let's have a peanut butter option on our menu. And the same way I see this Bitcoin, where if we have enough people that are so strong about Bitcoin that they want to adopt Bitcoin as their main store value, adopt Bitcoin as their main medium of exchange, adopt Bitcoin as the main unit of account, and they're intolerant about it, they go in a store and say, can I pay with Bitcoin here? And the store owner says no, and you walk out and you're like, oh, sorry, I will find an option where I can pay with Bitcoin. At this point, every store, every merchant, every restaurant will say, oh, I better have a Bitcoin option. And we're not there yet at all. Like we are very far away from that. That's why we are so early. Like we are still like figuring out the store of value kind of a thing. And we then only can move on to media of exchange and all the rest of things and slowly get to that point. And my main point is like, till we're at this point, we should never stop fighting. We need enough people to push the mainstream over the edge that Bitcoin is a normal option for every money on the world, where you can pay with it, you can receive it. It's very normal that I want to have Bitcoin so normal integrated that when you go to a new company and you work there, they ask you, do you want to be paid in the local fiat currency or Bitcoin? Like that's where I really want to get towards with Bitcoin. It's the same way if someone invites you for dinner, he will ask you, are you omnivore? Are you vegetarian? Are you carnivore? Like if you are invited to dinner, you should better ask that, because you don't want to serve something that he doesn't eat. And so I want to get those the same point with Bitcoin, and I think we still have a long way to fight for that. And so politically fighting, grassroots fighting, whatever fighting, building a company in Bitcoin, like whatever you're going to do, or just write an article. If that's all you want to do, just write an article, put it out in the world, talk with Bitcoin about talk about Bitcoin with your neighbor. Like this is the thing that we have to do.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, people say that Bitcoin's inevitable, and that's I think that's a cope. I think you got to fight for it every day, just like you fight for anything else every day. I think it's inevitable because we will fight and because it's worth fighting for, but it's not inevitable inherently. It's just code that runs out there, and if nobody decides to run it, nobody decides to defend it, if nobody decides to store their energy and their lifeblood in it, then it's worthless. And back to your point about just an intolerant minority, the United States Revolution, I forget the number, but it was something like less than 5% of the continental people actually fought in the war. And that's all it took to get rid of the biggest empire ever at that time. So, all it takes sometimes is a little bit. And, everybody, there's an inspirational speaker that I enjoy that talks about this, but he says, everybody looks at George Washington, says, I got to be that guy. But what people don't realize is that you don't have to be that guy. There were hundreds of guys that charged the fucking field and made a difference. And so you don't have to be George Washington, but you can be one of the musket guys. You can be a drummer boy. You can be one of those other guys that makes a difference. You could be a spy. You could be whatever fits your skill set. But I think pushing this forward, this is an idea worth proving a point over, man. Like this is people have died for much less impactful ideas. Like this is about not letting another man print money that you have to work for. Like it's about basically usurping planetary usury, planetary theft, planetary fraud. And it's about driving it out forever for Bitcoin. And I think that's worth fighting your ass off for. So as you point out, all you need is an intolerant minority, and you're talking about kind of the market driven aspect of this. I hope it's purely market driven and there's no violence, obviously, but it comes down to just being resolute and just saying I'm not giving this up, and I'm gonna die on this hill. I don't care what the consequences are. I think that's worth it. And that's biblical too. There's the concept of the remnant in the Bible.
It's an interesting point because I always just covered for me the market driven one, but there is the values, the value, the war side of things, where we could even have some kind of civil war, some kind of revolution, and Bitcoin is by far the easiest and most convenient revolution ever in the history of revolution. If you think about you can run a node from your home. You can write some articles, write some ebooks, and have some podcasts, and just buy it. You don't have to go on the front lines and fight. You don't have to go. You don't even have to go outside for that. I urge people to go outside and meet people on meetups and go to conferences, do the things, but just being an active participant in a revolution was never that easy. And I'm mind boggled by how few people run a node, do self custody, and do the good work that every Bitcoiner in this early stage should really do to get to this 5%, whatever the number is, to really push the mainstream over the edge.
It's a global insurrection against banker occupation, to borrow words from Max Kaiser. And as you point out, what's the worst? You're not going to catch shrapnel. The worst thing that's going to happen is your liberal wine aunt is going to block you on Facebook because Trump likes Bitcoin or something. That's not that bad. Like you can do better. There are men that were sent to their death for much less, and I think you can handle it. So it's just time for strong men to create good times. That's really what it comes.
It's so fun. My aunt literally just yesterday asked me if I'm a fan of Trump, and I'm like, I wouldn't I wouldn't call myself a fan, but I'm also not against him. And I'm in Austria, so it's also his politics don't really touch me, so I'm not have that many opinions on that. But it was fun because she made that connection, Bitcoin Trump, which I'm like, why? Like it's great that he talks about it and makes that connection, and it makes a lot of headwaves because people look up to him that weren't in Bitcoin, and now they're like, oh, Bitcoin. He introduced Bitcoin for a lot of people. He orange pilled a lot of people. Kudos to him for that. But then the mainstream media going ahead and saying, yeah, Bitcoin is up 100% in the last 12 months only because of Trump. And I'm getting furious because yes, he's an important figure, but there are so many grassroots people fighting for this revolution every single day that you're just completely ignoring in that equation, and I'm getting mad. Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast, and if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.